Hey, I'm Pastor Rich, and welcome back. I'm so glad you can join us again this week. This week, I have a special treat for you. We have another guest speaker. And in our continued special guest speaker segment, we have my good friend, Jonathan Wheeler. So, for those who may not have joined us before, we are Seventh-day Adventists. I'm a Seventh-day Adventist pastor, and we believe in the seventh-day Sabbath, which is a beautiful Bible truth. And if you desire to learn more about this truth and why we believe what we believe, I encourage you to contact me, and we can give you more information. I'd love to do that. And Sabbaths is the best time of the week. And while I was in Andrews University, I made several friends, and I actually was staying in the home of Jonathan's parents. And so I got to get to know Jonathan better. And one of the things I learned to cherish more than anything was Sabbath time. When he'd be over at the house, we'd be talking together with his family, and I would get to experience the beautiful Sabbath time that Jonathan describes in his testimony. So Jonathan's going to share several testimonies of how God has been working throughout his entire life, and how God has been working to be with him. And as I listened to these stories that Jonathan's about to share with you, they brought to my mind a Bible verse that we've talked about together on this channel. It's Philippians 4, verses 6 and 7. It says, "Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus." So as I asked Jonathan if he'd be willing to share, I didn't realize he would so beautiful. I just shared what we've been doing, and for this testimony, this story, what these stories go so well with what we've been doing, and bringing into practice, showing how God practically comes into our lives and provides peace as we trust in him. And so as you hear these stories, hear these testimonies, you're getting a taste of what it's like to spend a Sabbath, a Friday night, a Sabbath day after lunch with Jonathan. And you're going to learn quickly why I gladly call him my friend. So let me pray for you as you are blessed by his testimony of how God has shown his goodness and his providence continually in his life. Let's pray. Lord, guide us, teach us, encourage us. Please speak to our lives through Jonathan's story, his testimony, as he testifies of your goodness and of your truth. Please bring us closer to you and closer to your word as a result of this testimony. In your name we pray. Amen. All right. Without any further ado.
All right. Hey, guys. Good morning. Good afternoon. Good evening. Whatever time it is, whenever you're watching this. My name is Jonathan Wheeler. I'm a graduate student at Stanford University studying electrical engineering. And I've been asked to share something with you this morning. I was thinking and praying about what I should share with you guys. And I thought, well, most of you probably don't know me. So how can I share something? How can a stranger share something about God with another stranger? And I thought about it. I said, well, a testimony is a really great place to start. First of all, it does two things. First of all, it tells you a little bit about the person that you've never met before on the other side of the screen in this case. And second of all, it's a really cool way to share something with you because everything in this testimony is a fact. You can't controvert anything that happened unless you say that I was seeing things or I've misremembered things. But the things that I'm sharing with you, I could go back and I could find witnesses or people that had heard the story shortly thereafter. And so I'm definitely not misremembering the facts, and it definitely happened to me, and I'm excited to share it with you. I guess I'll just start with just a word generally about testimonies. Growing up, I had heard testimonies of famous evangelists. You know, they had started out in the movie business, and then after a while, they had a really deep, dark part in their lives and they came back to God. Or, you know, somebody was addicted to drugs and alcohol, and one day they were really depressed or saw one of their friends get shot, and then they gave their life to God and then served him after that. And a lot of these testimonies, you hear the exciting story about their life out in the world, and then they get baptized, and then that's the last chapter. And so I thought, man, like, is that what it means to have a testimony, like a walk with God? Is that just like, you have all your fun in the world, all the stuff that you're going to write, you experience all the fun things that you're going to experience in this life. And then after that, you get baptized and that's the end of the story. But as I thought about it, and as I wrestled with it as a kid growing up, trying to figure out whether or not it was better for me just to go out and get lost in the world just so that I could have one of those testimony experiences, I realized that there's something to be said about just growing up in God's plan, in God's will, and then living God's will all the way through. It doesn't make for the same type of riveting bestsellers at your local Adventist bookstore. But I think as far as personal satisfaction, a sense of purpose, and living a life that's free from family drama or other problems, it is definitely the way to go, and I would highly advocate it. I mean, for those of you who maybe be in your midlife and struggling with your own personal thoughts on Christianity and belief, there's a lot to be said about staying an Adventist just for your kids, just because your kids are going to benefit for it. I mean, obviously the first and foremost thing is relationally is your personal salvation, but I would probably be nowhere near where I am today were it not for the faithfulness of my parents or the faithfulness of my grandparents or the faithfulness of my great-grandparents. I'm a fourth generation Adventist. And so that being said, I want to share with you my story, where all of it's pretty much quote-unquote after I had my quote-unquote conversion experience. Most other stories is everything before. This one's everything after I knew who God was and just let him be in my life. So I'll start the story. I was born in Florida. I'm the oldest of 3 kids. And when I was 5 years old, my parents decided to move up to Wisconsin to be with my grandfather who had just had a stroke. My father was going to be the sole breadwinner while my mom was taking care of us kids and my grandfather. And even though he had skills with software and with running radio stations and with teaching high school math and science, he really felt that his passion and what he wanted to do was to fly airplanes. And so he wrote a resume and sent it off to 34 different companies. And the companies called back. Only three of them out of the 34 called back and invited them for an interview. And at the end of the interview, they always ask, well, do you have any questions for us? And my dad said, well, yeah. What about this last line of my resume that says, will not work Sabbath? I'm a Seventh-day Adventist. I observe Sabbath from Friday sunset to Saturday sunset, and I won't work on Sabbath during those times. He had put that line at the bottom of all of the resumes that he had sent out. And the first 2 of the companies that had called him back, they said, oh, yeah, we really hadn't looked at that or thought about that. I guess that's not going to work. Well, thank you, Mr. Wheeler, for your time. But the last one that called him back, it was a company by the name United Feeder Services, and they were located in South Bend, Indiana. Now, for those of you who know your Lake Michigan geography, you know that South Bend, Indiana is kind of close to Berrien Springs, Michigan, where Andrews University is. And Andrews University is an Adventist university that graduates quite a few mechanics and pilots every year, and several of those people go off to work for United Feeder Services. And so they said, hey, yeah, we noticed this line at the bottom of your resume. No problem. We already have quite a few employees that are Adventists, and we have accommodations that are all set up so that you can go on Friday evening and spend time with your family. And so my dad ended up working at United Feeder Services, where he was able to keep the Sabbath. He wasn't home a lot during the week, but he was home every single weekend, and we were always able to open the Sabbath together. Well, eventually, United Feeder Services lost its business, its contract, and my dad had to look for work elsewhere, and he applied for American Eagle. And working with American Eagle, the way that he was able to keep Sabbath at American Eagle was by working at locations where there were not very many senior employees. The way that works is that they determine when you fly based off of seniority. So the most senior employee at any given base airport gets his pick of schedule, and the most junior employee gets all the leftover schedules that nobody else wanted to fly. And so my dad said, well, in order for me as a junior pilot in this company to keep the Sabbath, I need to work the least popular airplane, I need to be a co-pilot, and I need to work at the least popular base, which was in Puerto Rico. And so growing up in middle school, my father was usually leaving on Sunday or Monday. He'd work in San Juan or flights based out of San Juan, and then he'd come back on Thursday or Friday each week, always home for Sabbath. And growing up, as a little kid, I knew that God created the world in 6 days. I knew that the Sabbath was one of the commandments. I knew it was important, but one of the things that really reinforced the importance of the Sabbath for me was that my dad, even though he was frequently gone during the week, he was always home for Sabbath. And I heard stories about, some of the tough things that he had to go through work in order to make it work, to be home for Sabbath. And that was it was very core to my identity later on in life, that I was able to hold on to those experiences that my dad had gone through as I formed my own personal character. I went to public school primarily for 3 reasons. The first reason is that Adventist education tends to cost more than public education. And the reason's pretty straightforward. It's not that Adventist education inherently is more expensive to operate. It's because public education, it's mandatory for Americans to pay taxes, but it's not mandatory for Adventists to give offerings. And most of our Adventist schools are largely subsidized by primarily offerings. There's a little bit of tithe money, but it's primarily offerings. And so because we as Adventists are mandated to pay roughly 3% of our income in taxes to public education, but most Adventists do not voluntarily give 3% of their income for Adventist education. Adventist education, even though it is scientifically and statistically higher quality education, it is less accessible just because Adventists do not fund it as much as they should. So that was the first reason why I went to public school, was cost. My family, because my dad was working junior positions to keep the Sabbath, we were just not able to afford sending 3 kids through the Adventist system. The second reason was that the closest Adventist school was about 2 hours away. It was a boarding academy, and my parents didn't really want to split the family up, having my dad gone during the week and me gone, during the semester. And so we decided to go to the local city's public schools. The third reason was my parents said, wherever you go, you're probably going to find what you're looking for. If you're looking to get into trouble at an Adventist school and participate in activities that are going to ruin your character, you'll probably find it at an Adventist school if you look for it. If you're looking to stay out of trouble and do enriching activities at a public school, you'll probably find those at the public school. It really depends at the end of the day what you're looking for. Now, granted, at an Adventist school, you're more likely to find peers and teachers that are going to enrich you and lift you up. And at a public school, you're likely to run into peers and teachers and textbooks that are going to tell you that God does not exist. But as long as the family is there supporting the kid and enriching them outside of school, taking part of the kid's development and enrichment outside of school, you'll still be able to navigate it, even though it's a sub-ideal environment. And so I went to public school. It was actually kind of cool because there were quite a few opportunities that I had to witness to some of my peers. For example, I frequently took part in math competitions where they would get all the nerds and geeks on a school bus, bring them to a school somewhere else, and they would have timed math competitions, and you would get points for answering as many questions as possible correctly during the time allotted. And sometimes those competitions were team competitions. So you would be on a group of 8 kids from your school, and there'd be another school with a team of 8 kids. And I remember my friends would come to me and they would say, Jonathan, there's a team competition coming up next Saturday. It's very important that you come. And I would say, I can't. And they would say, well, why not? It's like, well, I'm an Adventist and I keep the Sabbath. And I'm like, well, what's that? And I said, well, God created the world in 6 days and he rested on the Saturday and he spent that time with mankind. And every week he invites mankind to lay down everything that they were doing the first 6 days of the week and focus on him and to recalibrate themselves, spend time in nature, grounding themselves, centering themselves on what's important, and treating it as a holy day. And that's the reason why I can't come and participate in the math league. And they would say, oh, there's got to be some way. Can you please can you ask your priest and ask for forgiveness? Like it's really important. I'm sure your priest will understand. And I could just never, even though I fully at this age probably didn't fully understand what the Sabbath meant on a very deep and mature level, because I could see that my dad was making deep sacrifices in his career for the Sabbath, I knew from that alone that it was something really important that I needed to observe and keep. And as I grew up, I relied less and less of just because my dad did it, but it was important to my dad. Why was it important to my dad? And then I was able to uncover all the reasons why it was important to my dad. And those now are also reasons why I keep the Sabbath as well. But I think it was also a cool experience going through high school because there were numerous times where there were activities that were on Sabbath. And I, as the oldest amongst my siblings, was able to navigate through those situations and provide examples not only for my siblings, but there were also other Adventists families that had younger kids that were also going through public school behind my family. And they were also able to navigate through those same situations because of some of the things that I was able to be a witness for myself. And so I like to think that in the same way that the Andrews University pilots and mechanics that were working at United Feeder Services kind of paved the way for my dad, so too I was able to kind of pave the way for Adventists in public school education at my high school. The high school years are a period where people begin to experiment with how the world works and shape their worldview. Growing up, my parents had always been very intentional about trying to tell me about the biblical worldview. And in the Bible, it says that there is a spiritual world and that there are certain things in the spiritual world that we need to watch out for, specifically spiritualism. I had friends that bought a Ouija board. It's crazy. I guess you can get Ouija boards at Walmart, which is nuts considering their origins. But they had a Ouija board, and sometimes they would get it out on the weekends when we would go over and play at their house. And they would say, what should we do right now? Oh, let's play with the Ouija board. And I would say, well, I have some pretty strong convictions about this. You guys might not believe that there's anything to it, but I really believe that when you do this, you're inviting evil angels into your life. And it's not what I'm about. And so I'd tell them, I'm going to go upstairs and hang out with your dad until you guys put the thing away. And sometimes I would say, I'm just going to go home now. A friend of mine named Zach came to school on Monday, and he told me, Jonathan, the weirdest thing happened on Friday evening. I said, well, tell me. He said, well, on Friday evening, we all got the Ouija board out. And for those of you who don't know, a Ouija board is kind of a block of wood, and it's got letters on it. And then there's a small block of wood that everybody lightly rests their fingers on. And then you ask a question to the Ouija board, and then you move that board around, and it points to certain letters that then it will point to one letter and then another letter, and it will spell out certain phrases. If you don't have a worldview that includes the supernatural in it, you just assume that the Ouija board spells out words, English words, because human beings, when they've all got their fingers on it, subconsciously move it to spell different words. But if you have a worldview that includes the supernatural in it, you would believe that the Ouija board is being guided ultimately by evil spirits that are trying to communicate with you. And so, regardless of what your worldview is, I'll share with you what my friend told me. He said on Friday night, we got the Ouija board out, and we decided that we were going to ask it what some of our friends were up to. And so they said, all right, what is Brandon up to right now? And the Ouija board said, Burger, burger. And so they got out their cell phone and they texted Brandon and said, "Hey, Brandon, what are you up to right now?" And Brandon would respond, "Oh, I'm at McDonald's. I'm like having a Big Mac," or something like that. And they said, "Wow, the Ouija board knew what Brandon was up to even before we texted him. Okay, Ouija board, what is Kelly up to right now?" And they would all put their fingers on the Ouija board's little marker and they would move it around. And it would spell out like something like MOVIE, movie. And then they would text Kelly and they would say, "Kelly, what are you up to right now?" And Kelly would say, "Oh, I'm at the movie theater. I'm watching the latest release." I said, "Wow, it knew what Kelly was up to." And my friend Zach, he said, "Then we got to you and something very strange happened." Now, I never went to parties on Friday nights because I was spending time with my family, welcoming in the Sabbath, asking God's presence. We would sing Sabbath songs. We would study the Bible. And so my friends, I guess they didn't know that I had this weekly tradition, which is why they needed to ask. They said, "All right, what is Jonathan doing right now?" And the Ouija board said, "I don't know." And they said, "Okay, why don't you know?" They were trying to probe because they had been so accurate before, and all of a sudden it wasn't working. And the response that the Ouija board gave was, "They won't let us in the house," or something like that. That's what Zach told me. And when I heard that, man, if I had doubts that God existed before that experience, I don't remember having doubts, but if I would have had doubts, that would have been enough to prove to me that there was a God. And there was not only just a God, but there was a God that A, cared about us, B, was specific and intentional about telling us not to mess around with spirituality, and C, that this God fills the households of those who pray for his presence, and he sends his angels to protect them from evil forces. And that we live in a world that has a supernatural component to it, and that mankind by himself cannot escape, the Ouija board knew where Brandon and Kelly was. And that we have a God that's on our side that protects us from supernatural forces that would harm us. In high school, I also had a chance to shape my financial worldview. I had always believed in tithing. Growing up, I saw the verses and I said, well, good Christians tithe, and my parents tithe, my grandparents tithe, and so I'm going to tithe too. And it's really cool how with this too, as God was shaping my experience, he was giving me confirmations that I was doing his will. I was playing music in a pit orchestra. They had me doing 10 performances and they were paying me $25 per performance. And at the end of that, I had $250, a check for $250 that I could deposit into my bank account. I had already said that I was going to tithe some, and I had already said I'm going to save some for college. And I said, well, all of my friends seem to have better shoes than me. I never really felt that I was poor, but I definitely observed that all my friends tended to have more stylish shoes. We got our shoes at Walmart usually whenever we were grocery shopping, and we noticed that our shoes were really, really, really looking old. Then we would get new shoes. And so I had really come to fancy these Converse shoes, I really liked the style, but I didn't want to be the type of guy that wore them just because they were the name brand shoe. So I decided that I wanted to get some Converse that were kind of off-brand, not like made by the main brand, but some off-brand. And I wanted them to have the white tip. I wanted them to be black. I wanted them to have white stitching. I was very particular in my mind with what type of shoe I wanted. And I hadn't told anybody what shoe that I wanted, but I figured that it was probably going to be about $60. I had never gone shopping for shoes before, but I just guessed I'll just set aside $60 for this. Didn't tell anybody about my plans. Shortly thereafter, I was at church, and somebody was up on the platform making announcements. And they said, as you know, at our church, we have quite a few students that come here from Malawi, a country in Africa, and they study here. When they go back, they do community service mission activities for their country. And one of the things that they have written to us to say is that shoes are a big need in Malawi. Many people in Malawi don't walk around with shoes. And $100 for shoes in Malawi will go a lot farther to buy shoes for the natives than $100 for shoes in the US would. In America, you might buy a few shoes for that. But in Malawi, you can put shoes on a lot of kids and a lot of people. And so at that point, I felt pretty convicted. I said, wow, God, you just gave me money, and you just, you also know that I want shoes. I haven't told anybody, but you know my heart, you know my thoughts. I have my checkbook with me. I've allocated $60 for shoes. But I also know that shoes are a want, not a necessity for me, because I've always gotten the cheap Walmart shoes, and so I can keep on wearing cheap Walmart shoes, but I kind of would also like some new shoes that are kind of stylish like my friends have. So I don't know what to do, but if you want me to have new shoes, I'll just give you the opportunity to get them for me. I'm going to write a check for $60, put in the memo, Malawi, leave the check in the offering plate. And if you want me to have the shoes that I want, you're going to find a way to do it. That's what I prayed in my 10th grade mind. Didn't tell anybody about this internal struggle that I had over shoes. Didn't tell anybody I was planning to get shoes. Didn't tell anybody about the $60. This was all between God and me. So then, it was either the next day, next Monday, or it was within the next 2 weeks for sure. One of my buddies, he came to me at school and he said, "Hey, Jonathan, I noticed that your shoes are getting kind of old." And I said, "Yeah." He said, "What size do you wear?" And I told him the size, and he said, "Okay." And the next day, he brought me a plastic bag, and he says, "I've got something for you." And I looked into the plastic bag, and there in the plastic bag were a pair of shoes that he told me he had only worn once. They were off-brand Converse-style shoes with a white toe, all black with white stitching. I had never told anybody that I wanted those shoes, but here they were. He said they were mine to have. And I was just blown away. It was just the exact shoes that I had in mind within 2 weeks after I had put the money in the plate and said, "God, if you want me to get shoes, you can get shoes for me." Normally, I've been told it's rude to look a gift horse in the mouth, but this is just a moment where I had to ask. I had to ask him, "How much did you pay for these shoes?" And my friend said, "Well, I paid $20 for them." And so I said, "All right, God, I see you. You can get a discount on shoes. That's pretty cool." So I wore those shoes pretty much every day for the next year. And towards the end of that year that I was wearing them, the shoes kind of developed a squeak so that every time I would walk, they would squeak a little bit. But I really didn't mind it because every time I would walk, it was kind of like a reminder. My shoes were reminding me wherever I went about how God was taking care of me. And so I didn't mind the reminder that God was watching over me. A year later, my friend, he looked at those shoes that he had given me the year prior. And once again, I don't think I have ever told my friend up to this date about the conversation that I had with God about the shoes. He looked at those shoes and he said, "Jonathan, the shoes that I gave you last year, they're beginning to wear out. How about I get you some new shoes? You still wear the same size, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And so he brought to me the next day a really fancy designer pair of Converse. And I asked him this time, it was just, I couldn't help myself. I said, "How much did you pay for these shoes?" And he said, "I paid $60 for them. I've worn them once. You can have them." And he said, "Wow. Okay. So the first time God got me the exact pair that I wanted, and I wore that pair every day until they wore down. And then God gave me the exact dollar amount that I, had set aside for the shoes." And so at that point, there was no doubt in my mind that God watches over our finances, our stewardship. And when we act on the things that God has told us to do and convicted us to do, God never leaves us in a place where we cannot financially operate. God watches over our needs and he asks us to be faithful. So that is just that's a principle that I've gone ever since. And I've never had a doubt that God does it for me and he does it for other people as well. Up until this point, even being sure that God was watching over me and taking care of me, I still didn't have what I would consider a meaningful daily devotional experience in the morning. I would pray with my family. We would pray at church. We went to Pathfinders. I would lead out. We'd sometimes pray a blessing over the food. So it wasn't that I was completely without God, but I didn't have that. Every morning you wake up and before you go down for breakfast, you have your devotions, right? I never had that experience. However, around this time in high school, I was getting ready to apply for college, and we were planning for me to go to Andrews University. And it was going to be about $30,000 a year. And one of my friends, Brandon, he was really good at hacking the system. So like he would sit down and he would read like a high school manual, and then he would go to his gym teacher and he would say, I can't jump rope today in gym class. And the gym teacher would say, like, why not? He says, well, according to the manual, I can be expelled if I hold a weapon. And the gym teacher would say, what do you mean? And he would open up to page 37 of the high school student manual that would say a nunchuck is defined as a rope of cord between two pieces of wood. And he would say, if I pick up that jump rope, I'll get expelled. He did all sorts of things like this, where he would look and see, okay, what does the rules say? How can you use it to your advantage? And then get your desired outcome. And so he came to me and he said, Jonathan, you want to know how you go to college for, like 50% off? And I said, I'm all ears. And he said, what you do is that you sign up for these advanced placement exams. They're offered by the College Board. And a lot of people think that in order to take one of these advanced placement exams, you need to take a corresponding class taught by your high school. So for example, if you want to take AP Calculus exam, you need to enroll in AP Calculus class. But he said that is not so. You can just sign up for the exam, sit down, write the exam, and then get a score for it without ever having taken it. And so he said that he was planning to take, like four exams without taking the classes. And he said, if you get a good enough score, and then you tell your university what score you got, the university will sometimes allow you to waive that requirement when you get to school. So for example, he, I guess, lined it up so that he was able to test out of 3 semesters of just off of like all the AP exams that he had taken. That's what happened afterwards. He told me about his plan before he ever started taking these exams. And so my mom and we said, well, Andrews is expensive. And in order to get to go through Andrews University without taking lots of loans, we're going to have to be pretty intentional about studying for these AP exams. And so my sophomore year, I took 2 AP exams. My junior year, I took 2 more AP exams, and my senior year, I signed up for 6 AP exams, which was unheard of. My high school counselor said that he had never heard of anybody taking 6 AP exams in a single year, much less doing well on them. But he said, hey, it's a free country, you can do whatever you want. So when I heard this, I said, okay, I've got some other friends that are doing this. They're not taking 6 exams. They might be taking like 3 or 4, but the Holy Spirit impressed me that if I was going to do well on these exams, I was going to need to be able to prepare and study and perform on them with skills that would be more than those available to your average high school student. And so I said, all right, God, you've made it very clear to me before that you're watching out for me, that when I ask you to watch over me in my house on a Friday night, that you're actually keeping evil spirits away. You've also made it really clear to me that, tithing, living on 90% of your income with God's blessing, is a financially better position than living on 100% of your income without God's blessing. And so now I'm going to take that same principle that you've taught me before, the principles from those other experiences, and apply it here. I'm going to take you up on your offer that if I commit to spending the first few minutes of my day reading the Bible, understanding more about who you are, praying and inviting you to guide my day throughout the day and to help me study, that even though my other friends have 24 hours a day accessible to them to use however they wish, I'm going to commit the first 15 minutes at first. That was all I did at first. I'm going to commit the first 15 minutes to you and see if you can bless the other 99% of the day, the 23 hours and 45 minutes, more than my other friends are able to make use of their 24 hours. And so that's really, I mean, it wasn't a lot. It was just 15 minutes a day, but it was the humble beginning for what has grown into my current devotional experience. There's this phrase that they say, you need to pray like it all depends on God, and you need to work like it all depends on you. And so this is not salvation by works, but it's definitely cooperating with God when he works in your life. I did everything that I could to study for those 6 tests. Because like I said, I wasn't taking classes for all of them. I was taking a class for AP US History. I was taking a class for, was that it? I took a biology class, and I took a chemistry test, I think, a class. But yeah, most of the tests that I was taking, I was just studying for them on my own time outside of school, whether I was driving somewhere or sitting in a doctor's office or eating at the dinner table. I just always had a book open, and I was just always studying my senior year for some AP exam. It even came to a point, and this is another place where God was working kind of under the radar in my case. I was second chair violin in my area youth symphony, and so I was just waiting for the first chaired violin to graduate, and then I would be first chair violin. I'd be like, oh yes, this would be so great. I could sit and play first chair violin. And then one day the director, he says, hey, does anybody have a friend that plays bass, upright bass? We really need an upright bass. And I looked around and I'm like, well, there's 30 violins and our symphony has only 1 bass. And I could selfishly try to stay here and be first violin whenever the real first violin concertmaster isn't here, and I can have the honor of being first violinist, or the symphony does need a bass. So I raised my hand and said, I'll play bass. And it was actually a blessing in disguise. I mean, it taught me kind of a lesson of humility, because violins, you get to sometimes play a solo and everyone's watching you, and you're kind of you stand in the middle and you tune the whole orchestra. And bass, I mean, like nobody cares about the bass. Bass kids are the ones in high school that get shoved inside of bass cases and locked in there for that, to bully the kids. So I said, okay, I'll go over there and play bass. But it was actually a blessing in disguise, because there was a couple songs that we played where the bass did not play for like 50% of the song. And so I would stand there in orchestra while I was studying for these AP exams, and I would have I would have the sheet music on one stand, and I pulled another stand close to me, and I had my AP computer science textbook in the other one. And so when the bass was supposed to play, I would play music, and then I would look over here while we were waiting to play, and then study for a paragraph or two. And I was just studying all the time. It came to the time of the exams, and I sat down and I took all the exams, and there was actually one exam. It was, I think, like AP composition or something like that. There was one exam where I had done virtually no studying. I had said, I'm just going to cut my losses because I have 6 exams and I don't even have time to study for the 6th one. So I said, I'm just going to go and I'm just going to take this exam without preparing at all. And so it came time in the summer, my mom told me that she got an envelope. And we knew that this envelope was going to be important. We saw it was from the College Board, the institution that administers advanced placement tests. And I knew that when I opened it, I was going to see the test scores. And based on how many good test scores that I had, would determine how much money I was going to have to spend on tuition at Andrews University. And for those of you who don't know how AP exams work, I don't know if it still works this way, but I think it does. They give you a score 1 through 5. A score of 1 means that you don't understand the material. A score of 2 means you have some understanding. A 3 means that you're proficient. A lot of schools will say if you take a 3, that's kind of like getting a C in our class, and that's good enough so that we are not going to force you to take it again. a 4 is like getting a B in the college class final exam, and a 5 is like, yeah, you have an A in this class. You really understood it. And like a lot of my friends, they were getting like 2s, 3s, and maybe a 4 on their college, on their AP exams. A couple of them were getting like 5s, but when I opened the letter, I looked at my AP exam results, and there were the 2 scores that I had from sophomore year, the 2 scores from my junior year, and the 6 scores from my senior year. And when I saw it, I knew that God had been honoring the time that I've been spending in devotions, asking him to help me study, because even though I had not studied at all for one of the 10 tests on there, all the way down it was 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, just 10 5s lined up right there. And when I looked at that, I mean, my mom was proud because her son had gotten a bunch of 5s, and I was just floored because I knew that scorecard did not necessarily represent my performance just as a human being doing it on his own power. But that scorecard represented the power of God working in a human being that's willing to cooperate willingly and invite him into their lives on a daily basis. And so, I mean, ever since high school, I mean, I've just had too many experiences that have just lined up for me to go back and think that it's a good idea to live life without God's guiding you. I could go on, I could share stories about times when I feel like I audibly is always a weird word, but like almost audibly heard God's voice talking to me. There was a time when I was in Lebanon. I was in Lebanon as a student missionary, and I had been praying all throughout my undergrad for girlfriends. I mean, like, not praying God send me a girlfriend, but I've been wrestling because for a long time there was a person that I had a crush on who didn't like me back at all. And I felt that God was giving me really sure signs that I should pursue her, and she was pretty sure that God was giving her no such sign. And so I would routinely wrestle over these questions. And there were times where I would stay up late into the night. I'd be praying, I'd be writing, I'd be journaling about it. And there was a time when, this had just been an ongoing conversation between God and I. Eventually, it was pretty clear to me that God was not calling me to continue in that manner, and that he was calling me to move on. And I started dating who's currently my now wife. And she had been fully aware through the whole process that I had been interested in some other girl. And yet for a full year, she said nothing about her intentions, about her liking me. She was just my best study buddy and my best friend through a lot of the process. And before we went off to Lebanon, we had talked about whether or not we were going to try to go on a long distance relationship while I was in Lebanon, or whether we would wait until after I came back from Lebanon to date. And after we prayed about it, we said, all right, we're going to go on a long distance relationship. So we dated for about a month where we were together, and then I was gone from her for a grand total of about 3 + 3 + 12, maybe like about 17 or 18 months we were apart from each other doing long distance. So we started out the relationship virtually long distance. We would my girlfriend and I, we would correspond with each other. We'd talk, and she would encourage me since she had been a missionary. But there came a point in my life where I began to rely heavily on my girlfriend's support, emotional encouragement, etc. And I had really started to invest heavily in her as kind of almost like my guide through life. And there came a time where God really convicted me, and he said, Jonathan, your girlfriend has become your idol. I need to be number one in your life. You have exalted her in your mind to a position that is not healthy to exalt another human being. And you need to put me first in everything. And if you can't put me first in everything, you ultimately can't proceed with that relationship. And so I probably came across really hard with her about this, but I told her we could always speak openly with each other about spiritual things, but I told her that I had felt that I'd been making her my idol and that I needed to take a few days off, not to contact her, not to talk to her at all, but just to spend time really recentering and refocusing on God and putting my girlfriend in her proper place and God in his proper place. And oh man, like that really shook me up. I remember that I would go up to the roof. I lived in Lebanon, and in Lebanon, a lot of times they have stairs that go up to the top of the roofs. And I would go up to the top of the boys' dorm. And I would pray, and I imagine, I haven't gone back there to check, but if you ever find yourself in Middle East University and you go to the top of the boys' dorm, there might be still a place on the boys' dorm where there's holes in the rocks that cover the ceiling, where I would pray and put my knees there to pray during the time that I was there. And oh man, it sounds silly to talk about it afterwards, but I wanted to have a girlfriend and to have a spiritual companion and a wife for so long. And I had prayed so intensely about it. And when I finally was in a relationship, I cherished that so much that the thought of losing it was so hard for me that I was just emotionally just completely breaking down. I found myself one evening in the shower, just sobbing, because I was in the shower and I was just hiding there so that nobody else in the dorm would see me crying. And in the midst, it was almost the clearest that I have ever heard God's voice. In the midst of it, I could hear almost as if there was a second line of consciousness inside of my brain. I was feeling panicked. I was anxious. And then all of a sudden, a very strong, calm, clear voice in my head came in and started talking to me. It was just as clear as if when you think about things yourself, it came in and it was like forming verbal thoughts and sentences saying, "Jonathan, I am in control of your life. And if you trust in me, everything's going to be okay." And for me, like when I heard that, I had never heard God talk to me in that way before, but I knew that something was happening. I just wasn't really fully able to process it. And so I was going back and forth with God, and he was responding to me. And there came one point to me where I felt, but God, what happens if after this whole process, I break up with my girlfriend? That's going to be devastating for her. How could I do this to her? And I started going back and panicking. And then all of a sudden that voice in my head came back, that stream of consciousness just came over. It's almost like if you were sitting in a car and you were driving all over the road. That's what it felt like in my thought process as I was thinking and crying in the shower. And that voice came in, and it's almost like it grabbed the steering wheel in my mind and held on to it and drove perfectly straight. And it said, "Don't worry about your girlfriend. I'm in control of her life as well, and you don't have to worry. Just focus on me and everything's going to be okay." And there have been other times when God has spoken to me. It's just never been that clear as it was before. But there have been times before where God has just come and I've been doing something that I knew I wasn't supposed to do. And I've been praying and asking God to give me deliverance and victory over it. I've been praying and asking God to take away the desire to do some of these things. And when those things would happen after like a long time of struggling back and forth and praying to help God get me out of these addictions to stupid little things, God would just sometimes come and I would sit down to start doing it. And he would it was almost like a slap inside my brain. He would just go, "Bam, Jonathan, what are you doing?" I'm saying, "God, I'm here. I'm listening." He would say, "Stop it right now. Close that browser window." And I would close the browser window. And God has throughout my life, as I've asked and I've wrestled with him, and I've said, "God, if you wanted to take it away, I can't give it up by myself. I don't have the strength to overcome this. I don't have the strength to part with this. You need to come into my life and help take it away." And there have been times where I've lapsed and gone back and every time God ultimately comes back and he delivers me, and he comes in the moment where I feel like I do not have the strength to go on, and he grabs onto the steering wheel and he says, "I've got this. Just let me drive. Just do as I tell you." One more story and then I'll finish. This is a story from when I was in Lebanon, and I was working there at a school as a math teacher. There was another missionary there that was working as the Bible teacher, and his wife was there helping him. And one day we had told the students at the school, maybe 5% of the school is Seventh-day Adventist. I I would say that maybe like another like 60 to 70% is nominally Christian of some sort. There might be like 20% that is agnostic, no religion at all. And there's like a 5%, 10% that's Muslim at that school in Lebanon that I would teach at. And we were always looking for opportunities to share biblical messages with these students. And one of the things that we did was to say, hey, why don't we have a Sabbath school for these kids, a special Sabbath school for kids, and special design for kids that are kind of new to Adventism or unfamiliar with the Bible. So we told the kids, the whole school, that on Saturday morning at 9:30 we were going to have a pancake or waffle breakfast, and that they could come. We would cook for them, and then afterwards we would have kind of the what Adventists understand as a Sabbath school. And so we made arrangements with the principal to have the school unlocked, and we made arrangements that a taxi would come and pick us up at where we were staying, because the place where we were staying at the university was about 2 miles, or maybe 1 mile, maybe 2 kilometers away from the school at which we worked at the bottom of the hill. We lived at the university. We worked at a grade school, K through 12. And so the arrangements were made, and we woke up on Saturday morning early so that we could be ready for the taxi to come pick us up. The taxi was supposed to come around, I think, 8:45, so that we could be at the school at 9 to get all the pancakes and the orange juice and all the other breakfast things ready. Well, 8:45 comes, and we're standing at the entrance of the university where taxis come to pick up people, and there's no driver. And so we were sitting there just kind of wondering, okay, what do we do? Did the taxi driver forget? We don't have any way of contacting the people who arranged the taxi for us. And so we're wondering what's going to happen. So we sat down just kind of saying, well, there's going to be kids that are going to show up at the school, and we told them that we were going to be there. And so this is an opportunity to share God with them. And so, yeah, we really don't know what's going to happen. And I think that we had all been silently praying that God would find a way for us to get down to the school. Now, I want to say a couple things about that university in Lebanon, where we were staying. First of all, in the whole of Middle East and North Africa, there are probably about 5,000 Adventists across the whole Middle East and North Africa. I mean, multiple countries, only 5,000 Adventists total. So in the Middle East and North Africa, when you're working there as a missionary, you know who are the Adventists and you know who aren't. Just because, like, you probably, yeah, I mean, we probably lived in the most densely populated Adventist place in the whole area. And, you know, they would all go to the same church service, like maybe 80 or 100 of them on Sabbath. And you recognized all of them. So we knew who worked at the schools. We knew who the Adventists were. We knew the people that worked at the offices. So that's one thing. The second thing is that very few cars drive to that university. The university is the last stop on a road that literally goes up to the university and stops. And there's no reason at 9 a.m. on Saturday morning for a random person to be driving up that road to the university, unless you were planning to go to church, but the church services usually didn't, in my recollection, start until a little after that. So we're standing there at 9 when all of a sudden a car comes up, and the car is not labeled taxi, because all the cars in Lebanon, they'll either have like a sign somewhere, or there's an overt way to say that they're usually a taxi. But it came up, and a person whom we did not recognize rolled down the window, and they said, "Are you guys trying to go to Bushria?" Bushria was the name of the school which we were trying to go to. And we looked at each other and we said, "This is a complete stranger. We usually don't get into cars in foreign countries with complete strangers, but they just came up while we were looking for a ride to Bushria, and they just asked us if we were wanting to go to Bushria." So we said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, I've got 3 seats, and there's 3 of you, and you could put the all your stuff in the 4th seat. Come on, get in the car. I'll take you to Bushria." And so we got in the car, and it's a steep path down the mountain, so it's hard to navigate on foot, but it doesn't take that long to drive. And so we didn't have that long to converse with this person. But we started talking to him, and we were asking him, "Oh, so what's your name?" And he said, "My name is Christian." And we said, "Oh, Christian, what do you do for, what's your work?" And Christian said, well, I study sociology and anthropology at the American University of Beirut. And we said, oh, that's cool. And so we made a little bit of other small talk. And when we got to the school, we got out of the car, and we were really not really sure to make what to make of the whole process. But usually, I tried to not pay for things on Saturday and try to avoid the amount of work that other people have to do as much as possible. But given that this person just came out of nowhere, we weren't really sure who sent him or if he was a taxi driver that just had amazing a way to read body language or something like that. So I felt, man, I should pay this person the going rate for driving us down the hill. So I go in, I try to pull out, the 4,000 lira, which is roughly $2.50, which would normally be taxi fare. And he says, no, I can't remember what he said. He said something along the lines of like, it's okay. I know it's your Sabbath, or I know the way that you guys work. You don't have to pay me. Something along the lines. He refused payment. And he got in his car and he waved us goodbye. And the three of us missionaries, we stood there on the curb and we were looking at our watches. It was like 9:10. And we looked at each other and we said, I bet you that was an angel that picked us up when we needed him and dropped us off at the school at just the right time. And we started to recount the reasonings why. We said, first of all, he knew where to pick us up. I mean, nobody drives up there unless they're going to the university. They're a taxi who's looking to get a ride. But this guy just picked us up. And if he were a taxi, he would have demanded payment. Or at least not have done it for free out of nowhere. He's probably not an Adventist that we know of, because we know all of the Adventists. They either go to the university church or they go to the church that's right next to the school. And then we started thinking about it. We said, what if it was an angel? If it were an angel that had picked us up and we had asked him what his name was, I wonder if God, when he sends angels, he says, here's your mission. I want you to follow the mission, but the exact specifics of how you follow the mission is up to you. So I wonder if he was just kind of ad-libbing a script as he went along. And when we asked him what his name was, he just identified as a Christ follower. So he would say his name was Christian. And when we said, what do you do for work? An angel, they're kind of witnessing this whole battle between God and Satan with mankind caught in the middle. And when we asked this angel, he said he was a student studying, and I believe that he had said that he was studying either like anthropology or sociology. And either of those words could be used to describe how mankind behaves with each other and how mankind responds to God. And so for me, the best explanation of what happened on that day was God saw that we were trying to get down to the school. Satan knew that we were going to make an impact on some of the kids that day by exposing them to truths of the Bible, and didn't want that to happen. And so he tried to prevent the taxi that was supposed to come and pick us up pre-scheduled from coming, whether he overslept or something like that. But God had other plans for us that morning, and so he made sure that an angel came in a car, picked us up and dropped us off at the school. We never heard of that person again, never saw them afterwards, but I think all three of us today still believe that was an angel that came and picked us up. And I wonder if one day when I get to heaven, I'm going to see my guardian angel and I'm going to recognize him from the taxi or from that little car that day. So this is my testimony. I pray that you've been blessed in hearing it. I pray that maybe we know each other a little better now, and that if we ever see each other in person, we'll have already made the introduction. And I also pray that God, as he works in each of your lives and he's writing your story, that you will see fresh new insights as to his character and his mercy that he has on us, and that you'll be inspired to commit your whole life to him with everything that's in your heart and soul and mind. I pray all of this in the name of Jesus. Amen.
I'm so grateful you could hear that story with Jonathan, that you've spent this time with us. I want to encourage you, whatever is going on in your life, whatever your struggle is, whether it's things you're doing when no one's looking, whether it's you're facing a major issue in your life regarding obedience to his character, to his law, or you're feeling alone, whatever struggle you're facing, if you're struggling under the oppression and feeling it, especially the oppression that has happening for centuries towards minorities in this country, if you're feeling it especially now in this pandemic, if you're feeling financial struggle, whatever you're going through, this promise still stands. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds through Christ Jesus. He is with you and he is for you. I have a prayer for you. Once again, Lord, please be with us. Protect us and guide us. Help us hold on to that blessing that Jonathan prayed for us, Lord, to you, that we can find your peace and be strong in you. In your name we pray. Amen. All right, until next time, he is for you and he is ready to be with you.